Let's start with, why is USAID so important? Because you mentioned like it's part of our leadership. Where's their role?
Sure. I want to start out by just talking about what makes it important. I think that setting that focus is really big. And I think the first big question is, why is it our job? Why are we the ones that are running this program? Why are we in charge of USAID?
Welcome to the first episode of the Alliance for American Leadership podcast. My name is Isaac Bly, and I'm here with one of our members, Kyle. Kyle, would you introduce yourselves and tell us everyone a little bit about A4L?
Sure. My name is Kyle Pickett. I am a policy advisor here at A4AL. My background is in policy and comms. So formerly, I used to work at a company called Cision for a number of clients, including the US DOT, the US DOI, NASA, and a number of different organizations. And I want to be clear, I'm not representing them here, just given background. Previously, I was an oil and gas journalist over in Kazakhstan and Ecuador and Mexico and Turkey. So kind of all over the place there. I studied political science in school with an IR focus. And so I think I've always had a really strong bent towards international relations. And that's what drew me to A4AL. I think a lot of the people on the team here come from an international relations background, either as students or foreign policy professionals. I think it's a great team of people who are really looking to maintain the U.S. commitment to foreign aid. Some people are attracted to the program and primarily because it's people looking to do the right thing. It's kind of a mixed bag of that and the fact that foreign aid is a huge boost to American foreign policy.
Yeah, and it's also really incredible because we have a super diverse group of people from all over. And it's really interesting to hear people who are focusing on like South Africa and to see this is a really very real human impact that these small amounts of money really make on people. Like a couple millions or millions of dollars, and these can save like thousands of people's lives. And that's one of the crucial programs that A4L is currently working for, is like PEPFAR. And it's this tiny program, like a line item budget, but it'll, in the next couple of years, if it gets suspended, it could lead to millions of people dying from excess, I guess, mortality around HIV. If anyone is interested in joining, we love it to have new members, and whatever level of contribution you're interested in, you can go ahead and find a link to join us on LinkedIn. And we really appreciate it if you would stick with us for this project, because we have a lot of important work to do, and we'd love to have you be a part of that. So be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And we're just going to get right into the meat of this and talk about sort of why foreign aid matters. Where does this whole foreign aid system come from? Because I think we didn't really start thinking about like the U.S. foreign aid contribution since like I guess like Kennedy. And let's talk a little bit about these cuts. Like, why is PEPFAR getting cut, and what does it really mean? Let's start with, why is USAID so important? Because you mentioned like it's part of our leadership. Where's their role?
Sure. So I think I want to start out by just talking about what makes it important. I think that setting that focus is really big. And I think the first big question is, why is it our job? Why are we the ones that are running this program? Why are we in charge of USAID? Why are we in charge of PEPFAR? And what is the point? I think that's the big question that's being asked on the Hill right now, is why is it our responsibility to do this? And I think there's a few different reasons. Number one is it's the right thing to do as a moral society. That's how we started working in this industry to begin with. Foreign aid stems from a number of different sources. USAID is a program from 1961. It was originally introduced under Kennedy, but it's a continuation of a number of different programs that we've had over the years. The Marshall Plan in the 1940s, and before that, the Lend-Lease program, are all pieces of this puzzle where we've been using American aid to support projects that we care about.
I guess the one thing that I'm thinking about is, because you're right that the U.S. has played a role as providing support for other countries during these important periods of time. But I think that one of the things you see, J.D. Vance, who's the vice president, talked about is maybe we should be spending this money more at home and looking inwards on our concerns, because there is serious issues around healthcare and all that. So what really makes this super important? Like, as an American, what are these tax dollars really going to? Because you can understand this, but people are thinking now, maybe we should change the strategy. And what's the consequences of changing that strategy?
Sure. Yeah. So I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is that this is not something that we're doing instead of investing in America, right? This is not America sending all of its resources to other countries. This is America sending a small portion of the American budget
When you say small, do you mean like 2%, 5%?
Fraction of 1%. It's not a big percentage of the American budget. It's not a big portion of the discretionary budget or the budget as a whole. It's not. This is a very effective program. USAID and all of the other pieces of foreign aid that the US has put together, they're all very effective, generally speaking. While there have been a couple of things that have been pointed out to give cover to the cuts, primarily it's being used on making sure that people receive food, receive healthcare funding, and a number of programs like that really directly impact people's lives in these other countries. When I say effective in a number of different ways, right? Because on the one hand, the Center for Global Development estimates that about 3.3 million people's lives are being directly supported by this foreign aid. But it's more than just that, right? It's not just something that we're doing so that, some of the most needy people in the world don't die. Obviously, that's the primary reason for it. But I feel like, especially when it's being challenged as a program, you need to really justify not just the fact that people's lives are being saved, but the overall strategic benefit that the United States receives from a program like that. Because ultimately, there is a question, and I think it's a valid question for people who aren't as familiar with these programs, like, why is American money being sent to other countries when there are problems at home? And the answer for that, I would say, is not just the fact that these are some of the heaviest at-risk people and populations, but because there are benefits for Americans from sending this money to those other countries.
So, the example of this that some people would point to, and something that was a concern, I think about Euro and AFRICOM, which is sort of these U.S. military regional districts. They talk about sort of the Belt and Road Initiative, which is very popular. So there's that idea of who can, I guess, create those relationships with these countries that have developing needs, and a large amount of that is around China. Even in Russia, like in the Sahel region, you've seen a lot of Russian sort of expansion of influence there, and it's not just saving lives that way. Some of the ways that it's so often framed by like national security minded people is building those relationships. And I think you touched a little bit on that sort of security strategy element of foreign aid when you talked about Kennedy and Lend-Lease, which I think gets to sort of not just why are we doing this, but how did we end up doing this? Because what's the history, I guess, of U.S. leadership in foreign aid? Just thinking about, I guess, too, and all that.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I just want to circle back there for a hot second and talk about, the Belt and Road Initiative is the Chinese, I don't want to say equivalent, but a similar Chinese program. And Eurocom, you're talking about that, is a European effort in some of these areas as well. So what we're talking about is there are a couple different countries which are providing similar programs in these areas. And the reason that, USAID is a compelling program for some of that is because it increases American soft power in those countries. And that is basically how we got into it. That is the history. In the wake of World War II, the US economy was somewhere between roughly 30% of the entire global economy. Basically, the entire rest of the world coming out of World War II. So a lot of the economy is really structurally unsound, and the U.S. starts providing funding through things like the Marshall Plan to basically get economies back up and running and to strategically invest in those other countries, and that gets expanded under USAID as the Cold War gets started, right? You have a lot of countries going into the 60s which are brand new. They're pieces of the former British or French empires, sometimes the Portuguese Empire, and there are a lot of them are starting to have independence movements. They're gaining ground, and the U.S. kind of recognizes this. And basically, there's two directions that things can go, and this is roughly decided around the same time as the Suez Crisis, where basically the U.S. puts a forceful hand in saying, like, no, we're not going to spend resources maintaining empires. We're going to allow these countries to become independent. And importantly, if we don't, then they're going to look at the appeal of something like communism as a way to justify their revolutions, right?
This would be the origin of the sort of the first world, second world, third world sort of concept, right?
Yeah, it's around that time, with the Second World, which is something we don't talk about as much today, being the communist world. But so that's about the time that, a fundamental shift happens in foreign policy as it becomes clear that these empires are going to crumble, that these countries are going to be independent. How do we want to approach that in a world where there is this bipolar pole between the US and the USSR? And especially if you're a country that's been, part of an empire and you've grown up trying to fight an imperial power that is allied with the United States, how do you imagine a world in the Cold War that is beneficial for those countries? Why should they care? Why should they be invested in working with the former allied powers? Why should they be bought into the system? And that kind of coincides at the same time with a long-standing American historical tradition of being very pro building up other countries through outreach. I remember learning this American diplomacy course that I took in college. Almost the entire original US Corps of diplomats were returning missionaries that had lived in those countries and that had established roots in those countries. And that became a lot of the core American foreign policy group initially. And to some degree, there's always been a very positive, like moral rectitude degree of American foreign policy that isn't always the case in other countries.
One of the things that also is coming through, because I'm not super informed on this, but the way you frame it, I think it's very interesting, is after these crises, and the Cold War is this period where America takes on world leadership that was held by like this colonial British Empire, where part of that process is not just building up arms against the Soviet Union. And to be fair, we never really fought the Soviet Union, but we did have these serious like soft power competitions in these developing countries. So it seems to me like a lot of the way you're framing this is US leadership on the rise being correlated with this soft power and these relationships that lead to the US position in the world.
Yeah, exactly. And I do want to be careful about moralizing too hard because obviously I don't want to brush over a number of things that the US has done over the years that haven't been, shall we say, morally upstanding. But at the end of the day, I do believe ultimately that the goal and the ultimate desire of most of the US foreign policy community over the years has generally been, at the very least since World War II and during the Cold War, is generally to promote a positive version of society on the international level that countries will be excited to take part in, that will benefit them.
Sort of, there would be that sort of, just to get a little nerdy about this, that would be the Adam Smith idea of trade and relationships as a net positive. It's the wealth of the world when it's brought together and connected. Everyone gets wealthier from that, which is sort of this underlying, I guess, like not liberal in like the founding father sense of trade, of free markets and freedom of navigation. And just the way you frame that, I think, is very interesting. That sort of that very positive image. And I was just curious because if people have listened to this for a while, they're probably very interested in U.S. foreign aid and seeing how like what positive impact they can make. Because I think being part of A4AL is a lot of fun. It's a great community and lots of new people and lots of different skills. I was just curious, what can people do right now to contribute to that if they're interested?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things that people can do. Number one, I do want to emphasize that this is a nonpartisan group. We're looking to work with everybody that we can to build up foreign policy. So if you have a senator or a representative that you want to reach out to through the group or through just your own initiative and let them know that you support U.S. foreign aid and that you support U.S. foreign policy being beneficial to other countries and people as a whole around the world, and us as a result of that. We kind of hinted at it, but I mean, we can go on and on about the amount of benefits. One that just strikes me off the cusp is talking about containing disease outbreaks in areas that don't have sufficient
Oh,
medical infrastructure, which I know that that's something that we talk about a lot internally, but making sure that if there's an Ebola outbreak, that it is contained before it transmits across country lines and stuff like that. But yeah, if you're interested in stuff like this, if this is something that is piquing your interest, number one, feel free to register. We have signups that you can find through our website. You can reach out to either Isaac or I if you want to do it that way. Other things that you can do are really just talk to people about what the benefits of foreign aid are. I think the Information is one of the things that's really important here. This has been a bipartisan program for years. And the fact that it's being targeted more recently, I think, is in part just partly because there's not been enough messaging to people who think it's something worth cutting. And I think it isn't worth cutting, at least not to the degree that they've proposed. And I think part of the reason for that is because something that we talk about here is all the benefits about preventing the spread of disease, about ensuring stability in other countries. Like these are pennies on the dollar that are being very well spent. And I think evangelical outreach about not in the religious sense, but like being evangelist for this type of program is one of the biggest things that we could see being positive for making sure that this stays around. But yeah, definitely outreach to your representatives, potentially considering membership here. And then as things get closer, we'll be talking a little bit more about elections coming up, but we're definitely excited to make sure that elected representatives pay attention to this as they're going through their checklists and budgets.
I know for a lot of people, like it's weird, or maybe it's your first time to talk to your elected official, and we're more than willing to help you. We have like scripts if you need them, and advice for all that. It's really valuable for your senators, whoever they are, to know that this matters and to have that sort of U.S. leadership be represented. I guess we're going to close out. And before we go, I just want to say that we'll have more of this content coming out pretty soon. And we want to talk a little bit about A4L's first time on the Hill, getting out, like you said, this information to local representatives, to federal representatives. And also, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of foreign aid. So stay tuned for that. It was great to see you. It was great to have you on, Kyle. Hopefully, we'll hear from you again. Do you have anything you want to say before you go?
I just wanted to say thank you so much for the opportunity, Isaac, and looking forward to talking to you soon.